Greetings and welcome to the Real Deal Science Fiction Podcast, where I discuss all things science fiction, science fact, and where it all comes together. I am your host, SciFi, and today is a special episode. With the release of Infinity War, I wanted to talk about the films which have led up to this point. Remember to subscribe to the Real Deal Science Fiction Podcast and write a review on iTunes or whatever platform you may be using. Join in on the conversation and follow the show on Twitter or Facebook, or go to polyscifi.com. That's PAULYSCIFI.com and post your thoughts on the feed in the podcast section. When I first started working on today's special podcast, I really didn't know how many movies there were leading up to Infinity War. I knew there were a lot, but the amount of films is actually quite staggering. Some of them are standalone movies which have some correlation to the release of this most anticipated title. Marvel has really put a lot of time and money into the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's all coming to a head with the arrival of Thanos. Infinity War is the first of two movies to be released which highlight the final battle for this iteration of the Avengers. I'm sure there are going to be other movies released after Infinity War which will highlight other heroes. I know Ant-Man and Wasp is going to be coming out in the interim, which is only one title of which I'm sure there are many. But today I want to take a look at the movies which have led up to this point. Marvel had a three-phase plan when it came to the Avengers series, and many of the critics thought there was no way they were going to be able to pull it off. But time makes fools of us all. The release of Iron Man in 2008 starring Robert Downey Jr. was the beginning of Phase 1, and what a release it was. There were those who had never picked up a comic book who immediately fell in love with the billionaire playboy superhero. Even those who had grown up on comics could see the choice of Downey to play Tony Stark was the only choice. Downey made the role his own, and now we can't picture Tony Stark being played by anyone else. The Incredible Hulk was also released in 2008 with Edward Norton in the role of Bruce Banner. I liked the movie, but as with previous iterations of the most notorious anti-hero, it flew under the radar and didn't garner much in the way of box office revenue. If they had cast Mark Ruffalo in the role from the beginning, I'm sure it would have been a different story. Ruffalo, like Robert Downey Jr., has really made the part of Bruce Banner his own. The Iron Man movies were the backbone of the MCU, and rightly so. Iron Man 2 came out in 2010. This movie regained the success of the first Iron Man movie, and people quickly moved on from the failure of The Incredible Hulk. A movie I had been waiting for came out in 2011. Thor was always one of my favorite superheroes. My ancestors came from Norway, so that shouldn't be a shock. Finally, we got to see the flawed Norse god in action. Though the movie did not deal with his abilities, but rather his humanity, it showed us that even without powers, the heroes of the MCU were super nonetheless. Captain America: The First Avenger was next up, and though it didn't have the critical success of the Iron Man movies, it was a good film, and allowed us a glimpse of what was to come from the franchise. Chris Evans, who had played Johnny Storm in the Fantastic Four movies, was tapped to play Steve Rogers, and the studio could not have made a better choice. The wholesome Captain America was really brought to life by Evans, and like Tony Stark, and like Mark Ruffalo, it's hard to imagine anyone else playing the role of Captain America. Then came Marvel's Avengers in 2012. This movie was the watershed moment for the MCU, and it was a huge success. We finally got to see all of our favorites on screen together, and it was glorious. I was so glad to see Loki, played by Tom Hiddleston, reprise his role from Thor. His patented mischievous grin and malicious intent was a highlight of the film. The end of this movie was the end of Phase 1, but it was only the end of the beginning for the MCU. Phase 2 began in 2013 with, of course, Iron Man 3. This movie was a standalone which showed Tony Stark taking on the Mandarin, and showed that even the great Tony Stark, the hero of New York, was not immune to the lingering effects of battle. He struggled with the past as he fought the demons which haunted him, but overcome them he did. We saw the return of Thor in 2013 as well with the release of The Dark World. We got to learn more about the Asgardians and the ties which bind Loki and Thor. Again, this was not a huge success for the studio, but in keeping with tradition, it was a well-made film, and it continued the story we had all become wrapped up in. Captain America: The Winter Soldier was released the following year, 2014, and like the first Avenger, it was not a box office smash, though it did well. The Winter Soldier saw the return of Captain America's best bud from the first Avenger, as Bucky was tapped to destroy S.H.I.E.L.D., and for all intents and purposes, he did. What was the one movie which caught the world by surprise? You guessed it, Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014. Before its release, we had heard tell of the Guardians making their debut, and it was not a sure thing that they were going to fit in with the already amazing roster of superheroes in the MCU, but the box office numbers told the tale. This movie was amazing in scope, and it really got me in the feels. This is the film where we finally got to see the true reach of Thanos and what his intentions really are. Avengers: Age of Ultron came out in 2015, and though it wasn't the big success that the first Avengers movie was, it was a blast. The Scarlet Witch and Vision finally made their appearances, two of my favorite characters. James Spader as the evil Ultron really made an impact with his dry humor and nonchalance at the decimation of mankind. There were those who were let down by Age of Ultron, but overall it was a good movie. It also showed us the location of one of the Infinity Stones, which gave the Vision life. The final movie in Phase 2 was Ant-Man. I love this film, and it never ceases to amaze me the ease with which the studio is able to tap big names like Michael Douglas. But with a grand vision like the MCU, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Paul Rudd is one of the most underrated actors out there today, and he did a fabulous job in the role. Phase 3 began with Captain America: Civil War. This movie showed the different motivations of the heroes we had come to know and love. We really got to see a mashup of great superheroes in this film, and the fight which pitted Iron Man against Captain America, who had allied himself with Bucky, the Winter Soldier, was one for the ages. This movie left me wondering what was in store for the follow-up movies. Up until this point, there had been no real surprises for me. This movie changed that. One of my favorite Marvel heroes of all time is Doctor Strange. So when I heard this movie was coming out and Strange was to be played by none other than Benedict Cumberbatch, I was over the moon. I could go on all day about this film, but suffice it to say that it was a great introduction to a complex character who holds the universe together. Doctor Strange becomes the Sorcerer Supreme. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 came out in 2017, and no one was surprised that this film was great. The cast they had assembled to play the Guardians was without a doubt an amazing group of actors who obviously love what they do. This film has everything to do with humanity, as Star-Lord finds out that he was not just a human, but he has some immortal DNA in the mix as well. That's why he was able to hold on to the Infinity Stone in the first movie. What does that mean for Infinity War? Spider-Man: Homecoming in 2017 was a huge surprise for me. I had always liked the Spider-Man franchise, but the actor chosen to play Spider-Man before this iteration didn't do the character justice for me. Tom Holland was meant to play Peter Parker at this point in his young career. The reckless abandon and the mistakes made by the youthful hero are just what I wanted from him all along. Tony Stark makes more than one appearance in this movie and brings Peter, who had appeared in Civil War, fully into the MCU. Thor: Ragnarok is an amazing film which pits Thor against the Hulk on a hostile world, but he must return to Asgard to save the day. The fact that in the MCU they can cross characters over from other films so easily really makes for a dynamic environment to create films in, and it keeps me coming back for more. The addition of Cate Blanchett as Hela was a stroke of genius. She's an international treasure. We had seen Black Panther in Civil War, but in 2018 he got his own movie, and it was a non-stop thrill ride. Finally, we got to see the rise of a superpowered nation, which is to play a huge role in Infinity War. I love the fact that we finally get to see people of color celebrated in a much more prominent way in the MCU. This was a movie without equal in the superhero lexicon, and it gives me hope for the future of race relations in the real world. Finally, we come to Infinity War, the end of Phase 3. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I'll be seeing it this weekend, so catch the Real Deal Science Fiction podcast on Monday to hear my thoughts on the film. I am so excited, I can hardly contain myself. Thank you for listening to the Real Deal Science Fiction podcast. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on whatever podcast service you're using. If you want to get in on the conversation, go to polyscifi.com. That's P-A-U-L-Y.
Hey, Pauly.
SciFi.com and post your thoughts on the feed in the podcast section. I'm Poly Sci-Fi, wishing you an amazing today and an even brighter tomorrow.